They said he was causing a disturbance. They said his dog was unregistered and dangerous. But when Animal Control Officer Stevens reached for the leash of Marcus Thompson's service dog, Bear, something extraordinary happened. The German Shepherd, trained to detect seizures and save lives, refused to move. 2 hours later, emergency broadcasts filled every television screen across the state as Governor Patricia Mills declared martial law, mobilizing the National Guard for one man and his dog. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Thompson sat quietly on the worn wooden bench outside the Riverside Community Center, his weathered hands gently stroking the thick fur of his German Shepherd. Bear, the morning sun cast long shadows across the cracked sidewalk, and the familiar sounds of the city waking up provided a comforting backdrop to what had become their daily routine. At 62, Marcus carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who had seen too much but refused to let bitterness take root in his heart. His graying beard was neatly trimmed, his clothes clean but clearly showing their age, and his eyes held a depth that spoke of experiences most could never imagine. Bear was more than just his companion. The 4-year-old German Shepherd was Marcus's lifeline, a highly trained service animal who could detect the onset of seizures up to 15 minutes before they occurred. The dog's alert system had saved Marcus's life countless times, giving him precious moments to find a safe place or call for help. Their bond went beyond the typical human-animal relationship. It was forged through necessity, strengthened by trust, and deepened by the kind of loyalty that only those who have faced life and death together could understand. The community center had become their sanctuary. Marcus volunteered there 3 days a week, helping with meal preparation for the homeless shelter and organizing donated clothes for families in need. The staff knew him as a gentle soul who never asked for anything but gave freely of his time and energy. They respected his privacy when he occasionally had to step away, Bear's subtle signals warning him of an approaching seizure. The regulars at the center had grown fond of both Marcus and Bear, often sharing stories or simply enjoying the calm presence they brought to the often chaotic environment. What most people at the center didn't know was that Marcus Thompson was a highly decorated former Navy SEAL who had served multiple tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. His military record was sealed, his real identity buried beneath layers of classified operations and covert missions that had shaped the course of recent history. The seizures were a result of a traumatic brain injury sustained during a rescue operation that had saved 17 hostages from a terrorist stronghold. The mission had earned him the Medal of Honor, but the award ceremony had been classified, the recognition known only to a select few in the highest levels of government. After his medical discharge, Marcus had chosen to disappear into civilian life. He rejected the fanfare and media attention that often followed decorated veterans. Instead, he found purpose in quiet service, helping others who struggled with their own battles. The service dog program had connected him with Bear, and together, they had built a simple but meaningful life focused on giving back to their community. On this particular Tuesday morning, Marcus and Bear were preparing for another day of volunteer work when their peaceful routine was shattered. A white van with official county markings pulled up to the curb, its engine rumbling ominously in the quiet morning air. 3 officers emerged, their uniforms crisp and their expressions stern. The lead officer, a middle-aged man with a permanent scowl and a clipboard clutched tightly in his hands, approached Marcus with the kind of authority that brooked no argument. Officer Stevens had been with Animal Control for 8 years, and he prided himself on enforcing regulations without exception. He had built his reputation on being thorough, uncompromising, and utterly immune to sob stories or excuses. His promotion to senior officer had come through strict adherence to policy and an unwavering belief that rules existed for everyone, regardless of circumstances. He viewed his job as protecting the community from potential dangers, and in his mind, any unregistered animal was a threat waiting to happen. The complaint had come in anonymously the day before. Someone had reported a large, aggressive dog at the community center, claiming it had growled at children and appeared to be poorly controlled by its owner. The report described the dog as potentially dangerous and the owner as a vagrant who couldn't properly care for the animal. Stevens had done his homework, checking registration databases and finding no record of the German Shepherd or its owner. In his experience, this meant trouble, and he was prepared to handle it efficiently and by the book. Marcus looked up as the officers approached, instinctively placing a protective hand on Bear's head. The dog remained calm but alert, his training evident in the way he positioned himself slightly in front of Marcus while maintaining a relaxed posture. Years of working together had taught them to read each other's signals, and Bear sensed the tension in his partner even as Marcus kept his expression neutral and respectful. Officer Stevens consulted his clipboard and fixed Marcus with a stern stare. The morning air seemed to grow heavier as he began to speak, his voice carrying the weight of official authority. "Marcus, this is it," he said to himself, recognizing the tone and posture of someone who had already made up their mind about the situation. Bear shifted slightly, his ears perked, and his attention focused on the approaching confrontation. The community center's morning bustle continued around them, but Marcus felt the familiar tightening in his chest that always preceded moments of crisis. His military training kicked in automatically, his mind cataloging exits, assessing threats, and preparing for multiple scenarios. But this wasn't a battlefield, and these weren't enemy combatants. These were civil servants doing their jobs, however misguided their approach might be. Officer Stevens stopped directly in front of Marcus, his shadow falling across the bench where the veteran sat. The other two officers flanked him, their positions suggesting this was more than a routine check. Marcus noted their tactical positioning and felt a flicker of concern. This level of preparation suggested they expected resistance or trouble. The morning sun climbed higher, casting harsh light on what was about to become a confrontation that would change multiple lives forever. Marcus Thompson, the quiet volunteer with the gentle service dog, was about to face a challenge that would test not only his own resolve, but also reveal the true power of loyalty, both human and canine. The peaceful morning was about to explode into a conflict that would reach the highest levels of state government and forever alter how the community viewed the unassuming man who had been serving among them with such quiet dignity. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As Officer Stevens opened his mouth to speak, neither he nor Marcus could have imagined that their interaction would soon involve the governor of the state, the National Guard, and a revelation that would shake the foundations of how society treats its most vulnerable heroes. The stage was set for a confrontation between bureaucratic authority and quiet heroism, with Bear serving as the catalyst for events that would unfold with stunning speed and unexpected consequences. The morning breeze rustled through the trees lining the street, carrying with it the normal sounds of a community going about its daily business. But in the space between Marcus Thompson and Officer Stevens, tension was building that would soon explode into something far beyond what anyone present could have anticipated. The quiet dignity of a former Navy SEAL was about to collide with the rigid authority of bureaucracy, and the results would send shockwaves through every level of government. Officer Stevens cleared his throat and consulted his clipboard with the practiced efficiency of someone who had handled hundreds of similar cases. His voice carried the cold authority of bureaucratic power as he addressed Marcus directly. "Sir, I'm Officer Stevens with County Animal Control. We've received a complaint about an unregistered and potentially dangerous animal at this location. I need to see registration papers for this dog immediately." Marcus felt his heart rate increase, but his voice remained steady and respectful. Officer, this is Bear, my registered service animal. He's fully trained and certified through the Veterans Administration Service Dog Program. I have all his documentation at home, but he's legally allowed to accompany me anywhere as a medical necessity. Stevens barely glanced at Bear, who sat calmly beside Marcus, his vest clearly displaying service animal patches and identification. Sir, our records show no registration for this animal in the county database. Without proper local registration, this dog is considered unregistered and potentially dangerous. I'm going to need you to surrender the animal for impoundment while we sort this out. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Bear wasn't just his companion. He was his medical lifeline. Without Bear's seizure detection abilities, Marcus would be unable to live independently or continue his volunteer work. The dog's training represented months of intensive work and a bond that had literally saved his life dozens of times. The thought of being separated from Bear sent waves of panic through his system, but his military training kept his voice level. Officer, I understand your concern, but Bear is a medical necessity. Separating us would be like taking away someone's oxygen tank or wheelchair. He's not just a pet. He's medical equipment that happens to be alive. I can provide all the documentation you need, but I cannot surrender him. Officer Stevens had heard every excuse in the book, and in his mind, this was just another attempt to avoid compliance with local regulations. He had dealt with people claiming their aggressive pit bulls were service animals and emotional support peacocks that disrupted entire neighborhoods. His skepticism was hardened by years of dealing with creative excuses and fraudulent documentation. Sir, I've heard these claims before. True service animals are always properly registered with local authorities. The fact that you don't have the paperwork with you suggests this animal isn't what you claim. Officer Rodriguez, prepare the restraint equipment. One of the flanking officers moved toward their van, retrieving a catch pole and heavy-duty leash designed for aggressive animals. The sight of the equipment caused Bear to shift position slightly, moving closer to Marcus while maintaining his trained composure. The dog's years of training included exposure to stressful situations, but his primary programming was to protect and stay with his handler at all costs. Marcus recognized the escalating situation and tried a different approach. Officer Stevens, please contact the VA hospital on 5th Street. They can verify Bear's status immediately. Dr. Sarah Chun in the service animal program can confirm everything I'm telling you. This doesn't have to become a confrontation. But Stevens was already committed to his course of action. In his experience, people who were legitimate didn't try to negotiate or delay. They produced the required paperwork immediately. The lack of documentation, combined with an anonymous complaint about aggressive behavior, painted a clear picture in his mind. This was another case of someone trying to pass off an untrained animal as a service dog to avoid housing restrictions or gain public access privileges. Sir, you've had ample opportunity to produce documentation. Your continued delay and attempts to redirect the situation confirm my suspicions. Officer Rodriguez, Officer Martinez, we're going to secure this animal for public safety. As the officers moved to surround Marcus and Bear, something remarkable happened. Bear, sensing the threat to his handler, didn't growl or show aggression. Instead, he pressed closer to Marcus and began displaying the subtle behaviors that indicated an impending seizure. His training had taught him to recognize the stress patterns in Marcus's body chemistry that preceded medical episodes, and the current situation was triggering every warning system in the veteran's compromised neurological system. Marcus felt the familiar aura that preceded his seizures, the slight disorientation and tingling that Bear had been trained to detect. The stress of the confrontation was overwhelming his already damaged nervous system, and he realized with growing horror that he was about to have a medical emergency in the middle of this bureaucratic nightmare. Bear moved into position, gently but firmly pressing against Marcus's legs, while looking up at his handler with the focused intensity that indicated an active medical alert. The dog's behavior was textbook service animal protocol, but to the untrained eyes of the animal control officers, it appeared to be protective aggression. "See that behavior?" Stevens pointed at Bear's positioning. "That's exactly the kind of aggressive posturing we were warned about. This animal is preparing to defend its territory. Officer Rodriguez, deploy the catch pole now." What happened next would be seared into the memory of everyone present. As Officer Rodriguez approached with the restraint equipment, Marcus struggled to maintain consciousness while Bear moved into full protection mode. But instead of showing aggression toward the officers, Bear began performing the medical response protocol he had been trained to execute. The German Shepherd moved to Marcus's side and began the sequence of behaviors designed to help his handler during a seizure episode. He positioned himself to prevent Marcus from falling, began applying gentle pressure to specific points on the veteran's body, and started the rhythmic behaviors that helped regulate Marcus's breathing and heart rate. To Officer Stevens, watching from his position of authority and ignorance, this looked like an attack in progress. The animal is assaulting the subject. "Rodriguez, Martinez, move in now. Secure that dog immediately." The contradiction was stunning. Bear was performing exactly the life-saving behaviors he had been trained to execute, while the officers interpreted his medical response as an attack. Marcus, fighting through the neurological storm in his brain, tried to explain what was happening. But his words came out slurred and confused as the seizure episode began to take hold. "Bear, medical, help." Marcus managed to gasp, but to the officers, his distress confirmed their assumption that the dog was harming him. Officer Rodriguez moved in with the catch pole, attempting to loop it around Bear's neck. The dog, trained never to abandon his handler during a medical emergency, refused to move away from Marcus. This created a dangerous situation where the officers were now physically wrestling with a service animal who was actively trying to provide life-saving medical assistance. Bear's training was absolute. No matter what happened, he could not abandon Marcus during a medical episode. The dog endured the attempts to restrain him while continuing to perform his medical duties, his loyalty and training creating an almost impossible situation for everyone involved. Marcus, even through his seizure, felt overwhelming pride in his companion's dedication. Bear was risking his own safety to provide the medical assistance that could mean the difference between life and death. The dog's unwavering commitment to his duty, even in the face of human misunderstanding and physical threat, embodied everything Marcus had learned about honor and sacrifice during his military service. The situation on the sidewalk attracted attention from other community center visitors and nearby pedestrians. Several people who knew Marcus from his volunteer work began to gather, their voices rising in protest as they witnessed what appeared to be the abuse of a quiet, helpful man and his gentle dog. "That's Marcus," called out Elena Vasquez, an elderly woman who had received countless meals prepared by Marcus's hands. "He's never hurt anyone. That dog saved his life just last week when he had a seizure in the kitchen." But Officer Stevens was beyond reason now. The gathering crowd, the resistance from both the man and the dog, and his own certainty about the situation had locked him into a course of action he felt he could not abandon without losing face. He radioed for backup, reporting an aggressive animal situation with multiple subjects resisting lawful orders. "This is Unit 47 requesting immediate backup at the Riverside Community Center. We have an aggressive animal situation with public safety implications. The owner is unresponsive and appears to be under the influence. The animal is displaying threatening behavior toward officers and civilians." The radio crackled with responses from multiple units, and within minutes, the quiet morning scene had transformed into a full-scale emergency response. Additional animal control vehicles arrived, followed by police cars and eventually an ambulance as bystanders called 911. report what they perceived as an assault on an elderly man. Marcus, still fighting through his seizure with Bear's help, was dimly aware of the chaos erupting around them. His military mind, even compromised by neurological distress, recognized the tactical situation spiraling out of control. What had started as a simple misunderstanding was now involving multiple agencies and threatening to escalate into something much more serious. Bear never wavered. Despite the chaos, the shouting, the additional officers, and the attempts to separate him from Marcus, the German Shepherd continued his medical protocols with unwavering focus. His training had prepared him for exactly this type of situation, where external threats tried to prevent him from providing necessary medical assistance to his handler. The crowd of supporters grew larger and more vocal. Community center staff emerged to defend Marcus's character, while volunteers and clients who had benefited from his kindness formed a protective circle around the scene. Their testimonies about Marcus's gentle nature and Bear's obvious training fell on deaf ears, as the situation had already moved beyond simple resolution. Officer Stevens found himself at the center of a public relations nightmare, but his pride and certainty prevented him from reconsidering his actions. In his mind, the crowd's defense of Marcus only confirmed that this was a case of misguided sympathy for someone who was clearly violating public safety regulations. As additional officers arrived and the situation grew more chaotic, none of them could have imagined that their actions were being monitored by security systems connected to networks that reached far beyond local law enforcement. Marcus Thompson's true identity was about to be revealed in a way that would shock everyone present and set in motion events that would reach the highest levels of state government. The morning sun climbed higher, casting harsh shadows on a confrontation that had spiraled far beyond anyone's expectations. What had begun as a routine animal control check was about to become a crisis that would test the very foundations of how society treats its heroes, and Bear's unwavering loyalty was about to trigger a chain of events that would astonish everyone involved. As the chaos intensified around Marcus and Bear, a figure emerged from the community center who would change everything. Dr. James Morrison, a retired Army physician who volunteered at the center's free clinic, had witnessed the entire confrontation. From the building's windows, unlike the gathering crowd of well-meaning supporters, Dr. Morrison recognized immediately what was happening to Marcus and understood the critical nature of Bear's medical response. Dr. Morrison pushed through the circle of officers with the authority that came from decades of emergency medicine and battlefield triage. His voice cut through the noise with practiced command. "Officers, step back immediately. This man is having a medical emergency, and that dog is providing life-saving medical assistance. You are interfering with emergency medical care. Officer." Stevens turned toward the new voice, his frustration mounting as yet another person challenged his authority. "Sir, you need to move back. This is an active law enforcement situation involving a dangerous animal." Dr. Morrison's eyes flashed with the kind of controlled anger that comes from watching preventable harm unfold. "I am Dr. James Morrison, and I'm telling you that dog is performing seizure response protocols. That man has a traumatic brain injury, and his service animal is preventing him from serious injury or death. If you continue to interfere, you will be responsible for whatever happens to him." The doctor's words carried weight, but Officer Stevens had committed too deeply to his course of action to back down now. The presence of multiple backup units, the growing crowd, and his own pride had created a situation where admitting error seemed impossible. "Doctor or not, sir, you don't have authority over animal control operations. This dog is unregistered and potentially dangerous." While the argument continued, Bear maintained his position beside Marcus, his training overriding every instinct for self-preservation. The German Shepherd's calm determination in the face of mounting chaos demonstrated the kind of loyalty that transcends species boundaries. His steady presence was helping Marcus navigate through the worst of his seizure episode, his medical training providing the anchor that kept the veteran from losing consciousness completely. From the crowd, Elena Vasquez stepped forward with tears in her eyes. "Please, officers, Marcus has been feeding the homeless here for 3 years. He never asks for anything, he just gives and gives. That dog has saved his life so many times. They belong together." Her words were echoed by others who had witnessed Marcus's quiet service. Tom Bradley, a homeless veteran who had received countless meals from Marcus's hands, spoke up with a voice shaking with emotion. "That man right there, he saved my life when I was ready to give up. Fed me when I had nothing, talked me through the dark times. His dog ain't dangerous. That dog is a hero, just like his owner." The testimonies continued to pour in from the growing crowd. Sarah Jenkins, a single mother who had received clothing and food assistance from the community center, tearfully described how Marcus had helped her children with homework while she worked late shifts. "He's like a grandfather to my kids. They love Bear. That dog is gentle and kind, just like Marcus." But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. Among the crowd stood Captain Angela Rodriguez, a recently returned Iraq War veteran who had been attending Dr. Morrison's counseling sessions for PTSD. She recognized something in Marcus that others might miss: the bearing, the calm under pressure, the way he protected others even while facing his own crisis. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, her military bearing unmistakable even in civilian clothes. "Officers, I'm Captain Angela Rodriguez, United States Army. I served 3 tours in Iraq, and I know a fellow warrior when I see one. That man has the bearing of someone who has served with distinction. His service dog is performing exactly as trained. You are making a serious mistake." Her words carried a different kind of authority, one that even Officer Stevens couldn't entirely dismiss. But the situation had gained too much momentum to be easily stopped. Radio chatter indicated that supervisors were en route, media had been alerted by bystanders, and the scene was rapidly becoming a public spectacle that would require official justification. It was at this moment that technology intervened in a way no one could have anticipated. The community center's security system, upgraded recently with advanced facial recognition software connected to various government databases, had been running continuous scans of everyone on the property. The system had been trying to process Marcus's identity since the confrontation began, but his seizure-induced distress had made clear identification difficult. As Marcus began to recover from the worst of his episode, his features becoming clearer to the cameras, the system finally achieved a match. But this wasn't just any match in a standard criminal database. The facial recognition system had connected to a classified military database that immediately flagged Marcus Thompson as a person of extreme national security interest. Within moments, automated alerts began cascading through secure government networks. The first notification reached the regional FBI office, where Agent Sarah Chun was reviewing routine morning reports. The alert that appeared on her screen made her coffee cup freeze halfway to her lips. Priority 1 alert. Classified subject Marcus Thompson involved in public incident. Immediate response required. Agent Chun's hands flew to her secure phone as she accessed Marcus's classified file. What she read made her blood run cold. Marcus Thompson wasn't just any veteran. He was a Medal of Honor recipient whose missions had been so classified that even most government officials didn't know the full extent of his service. His operations had saved thousands of lives and prevented terrorist attacks that could have devastated the nation. The alert system continued its cascade upward through the government hierarchy. Within 15 minutes, the notification had reached the desk of Governor Patricia Mills, who had recently been elected governor of the state after a distinguished military career. Governor Mills had served as a young lieutenant during some of the same operations where Marcus had earned his classified decorations. She knew exactly who Marcus Thompson was and what he had sacrificed for his country. Governor Mills was in the middle of a budget meeting when her aide burst in with the urgent alert. "Governor, we have a situation developing in Riverside. Marcus Thompson is involved in a confrontation with local authorities. His identity has been flagged through the security system." The governor's face went pale as she processed the information. Marcus Thompson was a legend in classified military circles, a man whose sacrifices had shaped modern counterterrorism operations. The thought of him being mistreated by local officials was not just a personal affront, but a betrayal of everything the state claimed to stand for regarding veteran care. "Clear my schedule immediately," Governor Mills commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected millions of lives. "Get me direct communication with the scene, and prepare the National Guard for immediate deployment. No one touches Marcus Thompson." Back at the community center, the confrontation was reaching a breaking point. More police units had arrived, and Officer Stevens was preparing to forcibly remove Bear from Marcus's side, despite the dog's obvious medical function. The crowd had grown to over 100 people, their voices rising in protest as they witnessed what appeared to be the persecution of a beloved community member. Dr. Morrison made one final attempt to reason with the officers. "Please just give me 5 minutes to examine the patient. Let me verify his medical condition and the dog's role. This can be resolved without anyone getting hurt." But Officer Stevens had moved beyond reason. His authority had been challenged publicly, and his pride demanded that he follow through with his original plan. "No more delays. We're taking the dog now. If the man needs medical attention, the paramedics can provide it." As Officer Rodriguez moved in with the catchpole once again, Bear positioned himself more firmly between the officers and Marcus. The dog's protective stance was not aggressive, but absolutely immovable. Years of training had taught him that his handler's life depended on his presence during medical episodes, and no force on earth would make him abandon that duty. The standoff was broken by the distinctive sound of helicopters approaching from multiple directions. The crowd looked up to see military aircraft circling the area, their presence both ominous and reassuring. Officer Stevens felt a chill run down his spine as he realized that this simple animal control call had somehow attracted military attention. The first helicopter to land was marked with the governor's seal. Before its rotors had fully stopped, Governor Patricia Mills emerged, flanked by military aides and state security personnel. Her presence transformed the entire dynamic of the scene. Local officials who moments before had been preparing to arrest Marcus suddenly found themselves facing the highest authority in the state. Governor Mills strode directly toward Marcus and Bear, her expression a mixture of concern and barely controlled anger. She knelt beside the still recovering veteran, her voice gentle but carrying unmistakable authority. "Marcus, it's Governor Mills. Patricia, we served in overlapping operations in Afghanistan. You probably don't remember me, but I remember you." Marcus looked up, his eyes still clouded from the seizure, but beginning to clear. Recognition flickered across his features as he remembered a young lieutenant who had been part of a joint operation he had helped coordinate. "Lieutenant Mills? You made it all the way to Governor. I'm proud of you." The governor's eyes filled with tears as she reached out to pat Bear, who had finally relaxed slightly as he sensed the change in the situation's dynamics. "Marcus, I am so sorry this happened to you. No one should have to go through what you've experienced today, especially not someone who has given so much for this country." She stood and turned to face Officer Stevens, her expression transforming from gentle concern to righteous fury. "Officer Stevens, you have just attempted to forcibly separate a Medal of Honor recipient from his medical support animal. Do you have any idea what this man has done for our nation? Do you understand the magnitude of your error?" Officer Stevens stammered, his earlier confidence evaporating in the face of gubernatorial authority. "Governor, we received a complaint about an unregistered animal. We were following standard protocol. Standard protocol does not include ignoring federal service animal laws, interfering with medical care, or harassing veterans," Governor Mills replied, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "This man's service record is classified at the highest levels, but I can tell you that he has personally saved more American lives than you could count." The governor turned to address the crowd that had gathered, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "Citizens of this community, you have witnessed something remarkable today. You have seen true loyalty demonstrated by both a man and his service animal. You have also seen how a community comes together to protect one of its own." She gestured toward Marcus and Bear, who were now surrounded by a protective circle of state security personnel. "This man chose to serve his country in ways that most of us cannot imagine. When his service left him with injuries that threatened his independence, he didn't ask for special treatment. He simply found new ways to serve his community." Governor Mills's voice rose with passion as she continued. "Today, you have seen the very best of what America represents. A veteran who continues to serve despite his own struggles, a service animal whose loyalty transcends understanding, and a community that stands up for what is right. This is the America worth defending." The crowd erupted in applause, their earlier anxiety transformed into pride and celebration. But Governor Mills wasn't finished. She turned back to Officer Stevens, her expression hardening once again. "However, you have also witnessed the dangers of bureaucracy without compassion, authority without wisdom, and the harm that can come when we fail to see the humanity in those we serve." The implications of her words hung heavy in the air as additional government vehicles arrived on the scene. The simple animal control call had become a state-level incident that would have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved. Governor Mills's declaration of martial law came not as a weapon of oppression, but as a shield of protection for those who had served their nation with distinction. Within hours of the confrontation at the Riverside Community Center, the governor had mobilized resources that would fundamentally transform how the state approached veteran care and service animal recognition. The immediate aftermath of the incident saw Officer Stevens and his team placed on administrative leave pending a comprehensive investigation. But Governor Mills understood that simply punishing those who had acted inappropriately was not enough. The system that had allowed such treatment of a decorated veteran needed to be rebuilt from the ground up. The first executive order signed under the Martial Law Declaration established the Marcus Thompson Veterans Protection Act, a comprehensive piece of legislation that would serve as a model for the entire nation. The act mandated immediate recognition of all federally certified service animals by local authorities, created rapid verification systems for veteran status, and established severe penalties for interference with service animal operations. Dr. Morrison found himself appointed as the state's first director of veteran medical advocacy, a position created specifically to ensure that incidents like Marcus's would never happen again. His first act was to establish mobile medical teams that could respond to veteran crises within minutes, staffed by professionals who understood both military service and the unique challenges faced by those transitioning to civilian life. The community center where Marcus had volunteered for 3 years became the headquarters for a revolutionary new program called the Heroes Haven Initiative. Governor Mills announced that the state would fund the transformation of the center into a comprehensive support facility for veterans, complete with medical services, job training programs, and specialized accommodation for service animals. Marcus himself became the unwitting catalyst for changes that reached far beyond his own situation. As word of his story spread through social media and news outlets, veterans across the nation began sharing their own experiences of bureaucratic mistreatment and system failures. The hashtag Marcus and Bear Challenge began trending, with people posting videos of themselves performing acts of service in their communities, inspired by the quiet hero who had never sought recognition for his sacrifices. Bear, meanwhile, became something of a celebrity in the service animal community. Veterinary schools began using video footage of his unwavering loyalty during the crisis as a training tool for future service animal handlers. His calm determination in the face of adversity exemplified everything that service animals were trained to embody, and his story inspired improvements in training programs across the country. The investigation into the incident revealed systemic problems that went far beyond one overzealous animal control officer. Governor Mills discovered that similar incidents had occurred dozens of times across the state, with veterans being harassed, service animals being impounded, and complaints being dismissed or ignored. The martial law declaration allowed for immediate implementation of corrective measures that might have taken years to accomplish through normal legislative processes. One of the most significant changes was the establishment of the Veterans Rapid Response Network, a system that allowed any veteran in crisis to send a simple text message that would immediately alert local authorities, medical personnel, and veteran advocates. The system was designed with multiple redundancies to ensure that no veteran would ever again face a crisis alone or be dismissed by those who didn't understand their situation. Alina Vasquez, the elderly woman who had spoken up for Marcus during the confrontation, found herself invited to serve on the governor's newly created Civilian Veteran Advocacy Board. Her passionate defense of Marcus had demonstrated the power of community support, and Governor Mills wanted to ensure that such voices were formally included in policy decisions affecting veterans. The homeless veteran Tom Bradley, whose life had been touched by Marcus's quiet generosity, became the first client of a new program that paired homeless veterans with stable housing and service opportunities. His transformation from despair to hope became a powerful example of how individual acts of kindness could ripple outward to create systematic change. Captain Rodriguez, who had recognized Marcus's military bearing during the crisis, was recruited to lead a new training program for law enforcement officers focused on veteran identification and crisis intervention. Her curriculum included mandatory education about service animals, PTSD recognition, and the legal protections afforded to military service members. The financial support that flowed from the state's Emergency Veteran Fund allowed Marcus to finally receive the comprehensive medical care he had quietly been avoiding due to cost concerns. Advanced treatments for his traumatic brain injury, previously beyond his reach, became available through the emergency health services that Governor Mills had authorized under martial law. But perhaps the most profound change was in Marcus himself. For 3 years he had lived quietly on the margins, serving others while believing that his own struggles were not worthy of attention. The overwhelming response to his story forced him to confront the reality that his service had meaning far beyond his own understanding. The letters began arriving within days of the incident. Veterans from across the nation wrote to share how Marcus's story had inspired them to seek help they had been avoiding, to reconnect with their communities, or to find new purpose in civilian life. A Vietnam veteran from Alaska wrote about finally applying for disability benefits he had avoided, claiming for 40 years. A young veteran from Florida heard about the dog's loyalty. This inspired her to get her own service animal. The dog helped her deal with her struggles from the war. Her life became much better. Children from local schools started visiting the community center. They came to learn about service and helping others. The quiet man became a teacher, even though he did not want fame. The incident had big effects on the law. The government started checking if places followed the rules about service animals. This case became very important. It helped make new laws to protect veterans and their service dogs. The police officer who caused the problem was not just fired. He was given a chance to learn and change. He took classes about veterans and service dogs. He felt sorry for what he did. He even started helping to make things better. The community center created many new jobs. Most of these jobs went to veterans who lived nearby. The money the state spent helped the whole neighborhood. Areas that had been poor and forgotten became better places to live. The dog's story led to new training programs for service animals. Trainers wanted to understand the special bond between the dog and his owner. They studied how animals could stay calm and helpful even when things got scary. The incident made people across the country think about how we treat our veterans. Writers and news people talked about the problem. They noticed that people say they support the military, but do not always help veterans when they come home. The story became a powerful example. It showed how easily heroes could be forgotten without proper help systems. The state leader used this story to ask for changes in how the country cares for veterans. She spoke to Congress about what happened. Her words helped get more money for veteran mental health services and service animal programs. The whole community was changed by what happened. Neighbors who barely knew each other started working together. They organized volunteer activities. The spirit of helping others spread throughout the area. The doctor's new job let him find dozens of other veterans who needed help. The program he created became a model for other states. People from across the nation asked for his advice and training. The publicity helped the man reconnect with fellow veterans from his military days. Many had lost touch over the years. The story brought them back together. This created a support network that had been missing from his life. The day of the incident became a special holiday in the state. Every year, they held ceremonies focused on community service and helping veterans. The man agreed to speak at the first anniversary event, even though he preferred privacy. The dog's legacy went beyond his own amazing loyalty. The incident inspired research into the bonds between service animals and their owners. This led to better training methods and better matching of animals with veterans. The place where the confrontation happened became a gathering spot for positive community action. A bronze statue of the man and his dog was built at the community center. It celebrated loyalty, service, and community support. Years later, when people asked about the incident, the man would quietly talk about the bigger lesson. He said society should treat all people with dignity and respect. His story had become bigger than just his own experience. The emergency action by the state leader had created space for healing and growth. It helped not just the man and his dog, but countless others. The bold action showed that sometimes extreme measures are needed to protect basic decency. The story became proof that loyalty crosses all boundaries. It showed that service creates strong bonds. It proved that communities can turn individual acts of courage into lasting change that helps everyone. 2 years after the incident, the man stood before the United States Senate. His dog sat calmly beside him. He was about to give testimony that would influence national policy for generations. The quiet man who once cleaned floors was now talking to some of the most powerful lawmakers in the country. His words carried the weight of real experience and hard-earned wisdom. The hearing room was packed. Veterans, advocates, and reporters had traveled from across the nation. They came to witness this historic moment. The committee chairwoman had personally asked for his testimony. She had read about the changes that happened in his state after the emergency action. "Your story has inspired new laws in 43 states," she said. "It has been cited in 17 federal court cases about veteran rights. What do you think are the most important lessons we should learn from your experience?" The man took a deep breath. His hand moved to rest on his dog's head. This simple action had become his anchor during public appearances. It reminded him of the loyalty and purpose that had kept him going through dark times. "My story is not unique," he began. "What happened to me has happened to thousands of veterans across this country. The difference is that my situation became public. That visibility created opportunities for change." He paused, gathering his thoughts. He had learned to do this during media training that became necessary as his story gained attention. The most important lesson is not about service animals or government procedures. It is about seeing the person behind the uniform. Military service does not end when someone takes off their uniform for the last time. In the audience, the old woman who had helped him wiped her eyes with a tissue. She had flown to Washington to support him. Beside her sat the man who now ran a homeless veteran program that had grown from one shelter bed to a network serving 3 states. The man continued speaking, his voice getting stronger. When the state leader declared the emergency action, it was not about military control. It was about creating space for healing and growth that our normal systems had failed to provide. Sometimes extraordinary measures are needed to address extraordinary failures in how we care for those who have served. The committee members leaned forward. They recognized they were hearing from someone who had lived through real change, not just theories about it. A senator who was also a veteran asked, "Can you describe the specific changes that have occurred in your state and their measurable impact on veteran outcomes?" The man smiled. This expression had become more frequent as he learned to accept the public role that life had given him. "The numbers tell a remarkable story," he said. Veteran homelessness in our state has decreased by 67% in 2 years. Veteran suicide rates have dropped by 43%. Problems with service animal recognition have fallen to 0 since we put in place the quick verification system. The room was silent as people absorbed these powerful statistics. The man's quiet voice had delivered proof that change was not only possible, but measurable and lasting. His story had become a beacon of hope. It showed that from crisis could come transformation. It proved that one person's courage, supported by a community's compassion, could change the lives of thousands. The dog remained calm throughout the testimony, a living symbol of the loyalty and dedication that had started it all. Together, they had shown the nation that heroes come in many forms, and that the most powerful changes often begin with the simplest acts of love and service. He gestured toward a thick folder of documents that his aide had placed on the witness table. But beyond the statistics, we've seen something more important. We've seen communities learning to recognize and support their veteran populations. We've seen former adversaries becoming advocates. We've seen individual acts of kindness multiplying into systematic change. Dr. Morrison, now nationally recognized for his veteran advocacy work, was scheduled to testify after Marcus. From his seat in the gallery, he marveled at the transformation he had witnessed in his friend. The quiet volunteer who had been afraid to speak up for himself had become a powerful voice for veterans nationwide, his authenticity and humility making him more effective than many professional advocates. Senator Walsh asked the question that many had been waiting for. "Mr. Thompson, there has been criticism that the martial law declaration set a dangerous precedent for government overreach. How do you respond to those concerns?" Marcus had anticipated this question and had thought carefully about his response. "Senator, I understand those concerns, and they're valid. Emergency powers should never be used lightly. But I would ask critics to consider the alternative. How many more veterans would have suffered in silence while normal bureaucratic processes slowly addressed systemic failures? Sometimes the greater danger lies in inaction rather than bold action." Bear shifted slightly beside Marcus, a subtle reminder of the medical support that had made his public service possible. The dog's presence had become a powerful symbol not just of loyalty, but of the adaptations that allowed disabled veterans to contribute meaningfully to society. "The martial law declaration lasted exactly 96 hours, Marcus continued. "In that time, Governor Mills implemented changes that might have taken years to accomplish through normal legislative processes. The emergency powers were used not to restrict freedoms, but to protect the rights of those who had been systematically ignored or mistreated." In the audience, Captain Rodriguez felt a surge of pride as she listened to Marcus articulate concepts that she had helped him develop. During their preparation sessions, Her own role as a law enforcement trainer had expanded into a national consulting practice, teaching officers across the country how to recognize and properly interact with veterans in crisis. Senator Janet Williams, known for her tough questioning style, posed the challenge that many had expected. Mr. Thompson, some critics argue that your case received special treatment because of your classified service record. How do you respond to veterans who say that only medal winners get attention while ordinary service members continue to struggle? The question hit at something Marcus had wrestled with privately for months. He knew that his classified decorations had opened doors that remained closed to other veterans, and the weight of that responsibility had driven many of his advocacy decisions. Senator Williams, that criticism is absolutely valid, and it's why I'm here today. Marcus replied, his voice carrying a conviction that silenced the murmur in the hearing room. My classified service record shouldn't have been necessary to receive. Basic human dignity and respect for federal law regarding service animals. Every veteran who served honorably deserves the same protection and support, regardless of their awards or recognition. He paused, allowing his words to resonate before continuing. That's why the programs we've developed in our state don't depend on service records or disability ratings or medal counts. They're based on the simple principle that anyone who raised their right hand and swore to defend this country deserves our support when they need it. The hearing room erupted in applause, a rare display of emotion in the normally staid congressional setting. Veterans in the gallery stood, many wiping away tears as they heard their own struggles acknowledged and validated by someone who understood their experiences. Marcus waited for the applause to subside before delivering what many would later call the most powerful moment of his testimony. I want to tell you about Sarah Mitchell, a young Marine who contacted me after seeing my story on the news. She had been denied housing because landlords didn't believe her psychiatric service dog was legitimate. She had been kicked out of restaurants and grocery stores. She had been told by a police officer that her PTSD wasn't a real disability. His voice carried a quiet intensity that held the room's complete attention. Sarah didn't have a Medal of Honor or classified service record. She was just a 24-year-old woman trying to rebuild her life after serving 2 tours in Afghanistan. But when she reached out through our Veterans Network, she received the same rapid response and comprehensive support that I did. That's what success looks like. Senator Chun nodded approvingly. Mr. Thompson, can you describe how other states might implement similar programs without requiring emergency declarations? Marcus had worked with policy experts to develop detailed implementation guides that were already being studied by lawmakers across the country. Senator, we've created a comprehensive toolkit that includes model legislation, training programs, and funding mechanisms. The key insight is that veteran support shouldn't be viewed as charity or special treatment. It should be understood as a continuation of national service, with communities investing in human resources that have already been trained in leadership, problem-solving, and service to others. He gestured toward the gallery where several veterans who had benefited from the new programs were seated. When we provide veterans with proper support, they don't just recover. They become force multipliers for positive change in their communities. Tom Bradley, who's here today, went from homeless to directing a program that has housed over 300 veterans. Alina Vasquez, who spoke up for me during the original incident, now trains civilian advocates in 47 states. The transformation stories continued as Marcus described a network of change that had grown far beyond his original situation. Veterans who had received support were now providing support to others, creating a self-sustaining system of mutual aid that strengthened entire communities. Dr. Morrison smiled as he listened to Marcus describe the medical advocacy program that had become a national model. The rapid response system they had developed now included partnerships with major hospital systems, emergency responders, and community organizations. Veterans in crisis could access appropriate care within minutes rather than waiting weeks for Appointments are being misunderstood by providers who lacked military experience. Senator Walsh asked about the financial sustainability of the comprehensive programs Marcus was describing. Mr. Thompson, these initiatives require significant resources. How do you respond to concerns about cost and long-term funding? Marcus had anticipated this question and had prepared detailed economic analyses that demonstrated the program's value. Senator, the initial investment in comprehensive veteran support pays for itself within 18 months through reduced emergency interventions, decreased hospitalization rates, and increased economic productivity. Veterans who receive proper support become tax-paying contributors rather than long-term dependents on social services. He pulled out a tablet and referenced specific data points that his team had compiled. In our state, every dollar invested in veteran support programs has generated $4.30 in economic return through reduced healthcare costs, increased employment, and decreased involvement with the criminal justice system. The hearing continued for another hour, with committee members asking detailed questions about implementation strategies, legal frameworks, and measurement metrics. Marcus answered each inquiry with the thoroughness of someone who had lived through the transformation he was describing rather than simply theorizing about it. As the formal testimony concluded, Senator Walsh offered closing remarks that captured the significance of what they had witnessed. Mr. Thompson, your testimony today has provided this committee with a roadmap for transformational change in how our nation cares for its veterans. Your example demonstrates that individual courage, combined with institutional support, can create ripple effects that benefit entire communities. Bear remained calm throughout the proceedings, but those who knew him well could see the subtle signs that he was monitoring Marcus's stress levels and ready to provide medical intervention if needed. His quiet presence served as a constant reminder of the practical support that enabled Marcus's public service. As Marcus gathered his materials and prepared to leave the witness table, he was approached by a young Marine in dress uniform. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos had driven 12 hours from her base to attend the hearing, and she wanted to personally thank Marcus for advocacy that had already begun to improve conditions for service members transitioning to civilian life. Mr. Thompson, she said, her voice steady but emotional, I wanted you to know that changes are already happening because of your work. My unit has received new training about service animals and veteran transition issues. When I leave the service next year, I'll have resources and support that weren't available when my older brother got out 5 years ago. Marcus accepted her thanks with the humility that had characterized all his public appearances. Staff Sergeant Santos, the real credit belongs to people like you who continue to serve and to communities who are learning to support that service. Bear and I just happened to be in the right place at the right time to start a conversation that was long overdue. As they left the Capitol building, Marcus reflected on how far he had traveled from the quiet volunteer who had simply wanted to help a stray dog find safety. The journey had been difficult and often overwhelming, but it had also revealed the extraordinary capacity for positive change that existed within ordinary people and communities. The story that had begun with a simple act of kindness toward a lost service animal had grown into a national movement for veteran advocacy and community support. Marcus Thompson and Bear had become symbols of loyalty, perseverance, and the transformational power of refusing to abandon those who need help. Their legacy would continue to inspire change long after their story faded from headlines, proving that the greatest acts of heroism often begin with the simple decision to do what is right, regardless of the personal cost or public recognition. 5 years after the incident that transformed a nation's approach to veteran care, Marcus Thompson found himself standing in the Rose Garden of the White House, preparing to receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Jennifer Martinez. The ceremony represented not just recognition of his individual contributions, but acknowledgement of a grassroots movement that had fundamentally changed how America cared for its military veterans. Bear, now showing the silver whiskers of his advancing years, sat beside Marcus with the same steady composure that had made him famous. The service dog's health had become a concern in recent months, but his dedication to Marcus remained unwavering. The bond between them had become legendary, studied by researchers and celebrated by millions who had followed their journey from that chaotic morning at the community center to this moment of national recognition. President Martinez began her remarks by acknowledging the hundreds of veterans, advocates, and community leaders who had gathered to witness the ceremony. Today, we honor not just one man and his faithful companion, but a movement that has reminded us of our sacred obligation to those who have served our nation. Marcus Thompson's story began with a simple act of kindness, but it has grown into something that has touched every corner of our country. In the audience, Governor Mills watched, with obvious pride as her former constituent prepared to receive the nation's highest civilian honor. Her own political career had been transformed by the decisive action she had taken 5 years earlier, leading to her recent appointment as Secretary of Veterans Affairs. The bold use of martial law that had once been criticized as government overreach was now studied in political science classes as an example of principled leadership in crisis. Dr. Morrison, now serving as the National Director of Veteran Medical Advocacy, had traveled from Geneva, where he had been presenting the American model of veteran care to the World Health Organization. The programs that had begun in one community center had become an international template for supporting military veterans transitioning to civilian life. Elena Vasquez, now 83 years old and using a wheelchair, had insisted on attending despite her family's concerns about the travel. She wore a small pin on her jacket featuring a photo of Marcus and Bear, a symbol of the Civilian Veteran Advocacy Network that now operated in all 50 states. Her voice, once heard only in defense of a friend, now influenced policy at the highest levels of government. Tom Bradley stood among a group of formerly homeless veterans who had become successful advocates and service providers. His own transformation from despair to leadership had inspired the creation of peer support networks that recognized lived experience as the most powerful tool for helping others navigate similar challenges. As President Martinez continued her remarks, she highlighted the measurable impact of the movement that Marcus and Bear had inspired. In the 5 years since Marcus Thompson first stood up for what was right, we have seen veteran suicide rates decrease by 52% nationally. Veteran homelessness has been reduced by 71%. Perhaps most importantly, we have seen communities across America embrace their responsibility to support those who have served. The statistics represented millions of individual stories of transformation and hope. Veterans who had once struggled in isolation now had access to rapid response networks, peer support systems, and communities that understood their service and valued their continued contributions. Marcus had used his platform to advocate for changes that went far beyond his own situation. The Marcus Thompson Foundation, established with donations that had poured in from around the world, now funded innovative programs that addressed the root causes of veteran struggle rather than simply treating symptoms. One of the Foundation's most successful initiatives was the Veterans Innovation Laboratory, a program that connected former military personnel with entrepreneurs and researchers working on solutions to complex social problems. The lab had produced breakthrough technologies in areas ranging from prosthetics to mental health treatment, demonstrating that veterans' problem-solving skills and leadership experience were valuable assets in civilian innovation. Sarah Mitchell, the young Marine whose story Marcus had shared during his congressional testimony, was now the director of the Women Veterans Advocacy Center, an organization that had grown from her personal struggle to find housing into a national network serving female veterans across all branches of service. Her work had highlighted the unique challenges faced by women transitioning from military to civilian life and had led to targeted programs addressing those specific needs. Captain Rodriguez had parlayed her law enforcement training expertise into a consulting firm that worked with police departments, emergency responders, and social service agencies to improve their interactions with veteran populations. Her curriculum was now mandatory training in 38 states, and her approach had been adopted by several foreign countries seeking to improve their own veteran support systems. The ripple effects of the original incident continued to expand in unexpected directions. Universities had begun studying the Thompson model as an example of how individual action could catalyze systematic change. Business schools taught case studies about the economic benefits of comprehensive veteran support. Medical schools included training on service animal protocols and veteran-specific health issues. President Martinez turned to address Marcus directly, her voice carrying both the weight of presidential authority and the warmth of personal admiration. "Marcus, when you chose to protect Bear that morning 5 years ago, you were simply doing what you believed was right. You had no way of knowing that your quiet act of loyalty would inspire a national transformation. That's what makes your example so powerful. It reminds us that heroism doesn't require grand gestures or public stages. It simply requires the courage to do what is right when it matters most." Marcus stepped forward to receive the medal, his bearing still reflecting the military discipline that had shaped his character decades earlier. As the president placed the medal around his neck, he thought about all the people whose lives had been changed by the events that had begun with such chaos and confusion. The ceremony continued with remarks from several beneficiaries of the programs that Marcus had helped inspire. A young Army veteran spoke about how the Rapid Response Network had connected him with mental health support during a suicidal crisis. A Navy veteran described how service animal recognition protocols had allowed her to maintain her independence, despite mobility challenges. A Marine veteran explained how peer support networks had helped him transition from combat leadership to civilian management roles. Each story reinforced the central truth that Marcus had discovered during his own journey. When veterans received appropriate support and recognition, they didn't just recover from their service-related challenges. They became powerful forces for positive change in their communities and beyond. Bear's health had become a constant concern for Marcus, who understood that their time together was limited. The dog's age and the cumulative effects of his intensive service were beginning to show, but his dedication to Marcus remained absolute. Veterinary specialists who had examined Bear marveled at his continued ability to detect and respond to Marcus's medical needs despite his own physical limitations. The president concluded the formal ceremony with remarks that captured the broader significance of Marcus and Bear's story. "The medal we present today honors not just individual courage, but the power of loyalty, compassion, and community support to transform lives and institutions. Marcus Thompson and Bear have shown us that the values we claim to cherish as a nation must be demonstrated through our actions toward those who have served." As the ceremony transitioned to a reception, Marcus found himself surrounded by people whose lives had been touched by his advocacy. A group of children from a military family had made a banner thanking him for helping their father receive proper care for his PTSD. A delegation of international visitors wanted to learn more about implementing similar programs in their own countries. One of the most meaningful encounters came when Marcus was approached by Officer Stevens, the animal control officer whose actions had inadvertently triggered the entire transformation. Stevens had requested permission to attend the key ceremony, wanting to personally acknowledge how the incident had changed his own understanding of service and sacrifice. "Mr. Thompson," Stevens said, his voice heavy with emotion, "I know I can never undo the harm I caused that day. But I want you to know that your example has taught me more about true service than anything else in my life. I've spent the last 5 years working with veteran organizations, trying to make amends and ensure that what happened to you never happens to anyone else." Marcus clasped Stevens's hand warmly, demonstrating the forgiveness and grace that had characterized his approach throughout the entire ordeal. Officer Stevens, your willingness to learn and change has been one of the most inspiring parts of this whole experience. The fact that our conflict became the beginning of your own journey of service shows that positive change is possible for everyone. The exchange was witnessed by several reporters, and Stevens's story of personal transformation became another chapter in the ongoing narrative of how individual growth could contribute to societal change. Dr. Morrison used the reception to announce the establishment of the Bear Legacy Research Institute, a collaborative effort between veterinary schools and medical researchers focused on understanding and improving the bonds between service animals and their handlers. The institute would be funded through the Marcus Thompson Foundation and would ensure that Bear's contribution to advancing service animal care would continue long after his retirement. Elena Vasquez, despite her physical frailty, insisted on speaking with Marcus privately about her own legacy plans. She had established a scholarship fund for young people interested in careers in veteran advocacy, ensuring that the civilian voice that had been so crucial during the original incident would continue to influence future generations of service providers. Tom Bradley presented Marcus with a photo album containing pictures and stories from the hundreds of formerly homeless veterans who had been helped by programs inspired by Marcus's advocacy. Each page represented a life transformed, a family reunited, or a dream restored through the community support networks that had grown from the original crisis. As the afternoon progressed, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him from a quiet volunteer to a national symbol of veteran advocacy. The transformation had been difficult and often overwhelming, but it had also revealed the extraordinary capacity for positive change that existed within ordinary people and communities. Bear, sensing Marcus's emotional state, moved closer and provided the subtle pressure that helped regulate his handler's stress response. Even in this moment of celebration, the service dog remained focused on his primary mission of protecting and supporting the man who had become his entire world. The event concluded with the announcement of new federal legislation that would codify many of the innovations that had emerged from the state-level changes inspired by Marcus's story. The Comprehensive Veteran Support Act would establish national standards for service animal recognition, create federal funding for rapid response networks, and mandate training for all government employees who might interact with veteran populations. President Martinez's final remarks captured the ongoing nature of the movement that Marcus and Bear had inspired. Today's ceremony is not an ending but a continuation. The work of supporting our veterans, of building compassionate communities, of recognizing the service and sacrifice of those who have defended our freedom. That work continues every day in communities across this nation. As Marcus and Bear prepared to leave the White House, they were approached by a young girl whose father was preparing to deploy overseas. She had drawn a picture of Marcus and Bear with the words, "Thank you for helping heroes," written in crayon across the bottom. The simple gesture reminded Marcus of why his advocacy work had become so important, and why it needed to continue. The story that had begun with a confused and frightened service dog refusing to abandon his handler had become a testament to the transformational power of loyalty, courage, and community support. Marcus Thompson and Bear had shown that individual acts of conscience, when supported by institutional change and community engagement, could create ripple effects that improved lives across an entire nation. Their legacy would continue to inspire veterans, advocates, and communities for generations to come, proving that the greatest achievements often begin with the simple decision to stand up for what is right, regardless of the personal cost or public recognition involved. 7 years after the incident that changed a nation, Marcus Thompson stood in a place he never could have imagined visiting, the United Nations headquarters in New York City. He had been invited to address the Global Summit on Veteran Reintegration, where representatives from 53 countries had gathered to learn from the American model of veteran support that had emerged from his story. Bear, now 9 years old and moving more slowly but with unwavering dignity, accompanied him as they prepared to share their message with an international audience. The invitation had come through Secretary of Veterans Affairs Patricia Mills, who had leveraged her position to promote American innovations in veteran care on the world stage. The Marcus Thompson model, as it had become known internationally, was being studied and adapted by nations struggling with their own veteran reintegration. Challenges. From the United Kingdom to South Korea, from Canada to Australia, countries were implementing variations of the rapid response networks and community support systems that had grown from that chaotic morning at the Riverside Community Center. In the weeks leading up to the UN appearance, Marcus had received letters from veterans around the world whose lives had been touched by programs inspired by his advocacy. A former British paratrooper wrote about how service animal recognition protocols had allowed him to maintain employment despite his combat-related PTSD. A German veteran described how peer support networks had helped her transition from military engineering to civilian infrastructure work. An Israeli veteran explained how community engagement programs had connected him with civilian mentors who understood his skills and helped him find meaningful work. The global reach of his influence still amazed Marcus, who had never sought fame or recognition for his quiet acts of service. But he had learned to accept the platform that circumstances had given him, understanding that his voice could open doors for veterans who might otherwise remain invisible to policymakers and service providers. Dr. Morrison, now serving as the Director of International Veteran Affairs Collaboration, had spent months preparing for the UN presentation. His research teams had documented the measurable outcomes of veteran support programs in communities across America, creating a comprehensive database that demonstrated both the human and economic benefits of comprehensive veteran care. The statistics were remarkable. In the 7 years since the implementation of the Marcus Thompson model, the United States had seen a 78% reduction in veteran suicide rates, an 85% decrease in veteran homelessness, and a 43% increase in veteran employment in leadership roles within their communities. Perhaps most significantly, communities with comprehensive veteran support programs had experienced overall improvements in social cohesion, economic development, and civic engagement. Elena Vasquez, now 85 and one of the most respected civilian advocates in the country, had flown to New York despite her family's concerns about her health. She wanted to witness Marcus's address to the international community, understanding that this moment represented the culmination of a journey that had begun with her simple decision to speak up for a neighbor in need. Tom Bradley had become an international consultant on homeless veteran services, working with cities around the world to develop programs that addressed the root causes of veteran homelessness rather than simply managing its symptoms. His own transformation from despair to leadership had become a powerful example of the potential that existed within every struggling veteran when provided with appropriate support and recognition. Sarah Mitchell, now 31 and a recognized expert on women veterans issues, had established international partnerships that were sharing best practices for supporting female veterans across different military cultures and social systems. Her work had revealed that while the specific challenges might vary by country, the fundamental needs for respect, recognition, and community support were universal. Captain Rodriguez had expanded her training programs to include international law enforcement agencies, teaching officers from dozens of countries how to recognize and appropriately respond to veterans in crisis. Her curriculum had been translated into 16 languages and was being implemented from Stockholm to Seoul. As Marcus prepared for his address, he reflected on the unexpected path that had brought him to this moment. The quiet volunteer who had simply wanted to protect a stray service dog was now being asked to share his insights with world leaders and policy experts from every continent. The UN Assembly Hall was filled with delegates, advocates, and veterans from around the world. Translators prepared to render his words into dozens of languages, carrying his message to cultures and communities he had never imagined reaching. Bear, despite his age and the long journey, remained alert and focused on his primary mission of monitoring Marcus's health and providing support when needed. Secretary General Maria Santos, herself a former military officer from Brazil, introduced Marcus with words that captured the global significance of his story. "Ladies and gentlemen, we gather today to learn from an example of how individual courage, combined with institutional support and community engagement, can create transformational change that benefits not just veterans but entire societies." Marcus approached the podium with the same quiet dignity that had characterized all his public appearances. He began his address by acknowledging the international audience and the shared challenges they faced in supporting their veteran populations. "Distinguished delegates, fellow veterans, advocates, and friends, I stand before you today not as an expert or a policymaker, but as someone who has experienced both the failures and the possibilities of veteran support systems. 7 years ago, Bear and I were just trying to navigate a simple misunderstanding. Today, we find ourselves part of a global conversation about how societies honor their obligations to those who have served." He paused, allowing his words to be translated, before continuing with the central message he wanted to share. "The story that brought us here began with a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of service and sacrifice. Too often, our societies see military service as something that ends when someone takes off their uniform. We fail to recognize that the skills, experiences, and commitment that made someone an effective soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine don't disappear when they return to civilian life." In the audience, delegates leaned forward, recognizing that they were hearing from someone who had lived through the transformation he was describing, rather than simply theorizing about it. Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength as he spoke, about the global implications of veteran support. "When we provide veterans with proper recognition and support, we don't just help individuals recover from service-related challenges. We invest in human resources that have already been trained in leadership, problem-solving, crisis management, and service to others. Veterans become force multipliers for positive change in their communities." He gestured toward the documentation that Dr. Morrison's teams had prepared. "The data from our programs shows that every dollar invested in comprehensive veteran support generates more than $4 in economic return through reduced healthcare costs, increased productivity, and community development. But beyond the economics, we've discovered something more important. When veterans thrive, entire communities benefit." A delegate from Sweden raised her hand during the question period that followed the formal presentation. "Mr. Thompson, how do you address critics who argue that veterans receive too much attention compared to other vulnerable populations?" Marcus had encountered this question many times and had developed a response that acknowledged the complexity of social resource allocation while maintaining focus on veteran-specific needs. "Madam Delegate, supporting veterans shouldn't be viewed as competing with other social priorities. When we create effective systems for supporting one vulnerable population, we often develop innovations and approaches that benefit everyone." He provided specific examples from his own experience. "The rapid response networks we developed for veterans in crisis have been adapted to support elderly populations, individuals with disabilities, and other groups that need immediate access to appropriate services. The peer support models that work so effectively with veterans have been applied to addiction recovery, mental health treatment, and job training programs for all populations." A delegate from Japan asked about the role of service animals in veteran support, noting that his country was considering expanding recognition for psychiatric service dogs. Marcus's face lit up as he looked down at Bear, who, despite his age, continued to demonstrate the extraordinary bond that had made their story so compelling. "Sir, Bear has taught me more about loyalty, dedication, and service than any training manual or policy document ever could. Service animals represent the possibility of partnerships that transcend species boundaries, relationships built on mutual trust and shared purpose. But the real lesson isn't about dogs or training protocols. It's about the power of unwavering commitment to those who depend on us. He knelt beside Bear, who had remained perfectly composed throughout the proceedings, despite the unfamiliar environment and the presence of hundreds of strangers. This dog has never asked for recognition or reward. He simply does his job every day because someone needs him to do it. That's the example we should all follow in our work with veterans and all vulnerable populations. The gesture was simple but powerful, and the assembly hall erupted in sustained applause as delegates recognized the demonstration of the values that had inspired transformational change across multiple nations. Dr. Morrison used his portion of the presentation to share detailed implementation strategies that other countries could adapt to their own contexts. His research had identified core principles that transcended cultural and political differences: rapid response to crisis, peer support networks, community engagement, and recognition of veterans as assets rather than burdens. The afternoon session included presentations from veterans and advocates from other countries who had implemented variations of the Marcus Thompson model. A representative from the United Kingdom described how service animal recognition protocols had been integrated into their National Health Service. A delegate from Canada explained how peer support networks had been incorporated into their veteran transition programs. Most significantly, a representative from Rwanda shared how principles of community support and recognition had been adapted to help former child soldiers reintegrate into civilian society. The application of veteran support concepts to this different but related challenge demonstrated the universal applicability of the core insights that had emerged from Marcus's advocacy. During a break between sessions, Marcus was approached by a young veteran from Afghanistan who had traveled to New York specifically to meet him. Lieutenant Amira Hassan had lost her right leg in an IED explosion and had struggled with both physical rehabilitation and societal reintegration in her home country. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice strong despite the emotion in her eyes, "your story gave me hope when I thought I had no future. The programs inspired by your advocacy have reached even my small city, and I now work helping other veterans understand that their service has value beyond their military roles." Marcus was moved by her words and by the recognition that his story had traveled farther and touched more lives than he could have imagined. "Lieutenant Hassan, your courage in rebuilding your life and helping others demonstrates exactly the kind of leadership that makes veteran support programs so valuable. You are the real hero in this story." The exchange was witnessed by several delegates, and Lieutenant Hassan's story became part of the conference documentation, illustrating how individual transformation could inspire broader social change across cultural and geographic boundaries. As the conference continued into its second day, working groups formed around specific implementation challenges. Marcus found himself in discussions with policy experts, veteran advocates, and government officials who were seeking practical guidance for adapting successful programs to their own contexts. The conversations revealed both the universal nature of veteran reintegration challenges and the importance of cultural adaptation in developing effective solutions. While the core principles of respect, recognition, and community support were consistent across cultures, the specific mechanisms for delivering support needed to reflect local values and institutional structures. Elena Vasquez, despite her age and physical limitations, participated actively in the civilian advocacy workshops, sharing insights about how non-veterans could effectively support military populations. Her experience had taught her that civilian voices were often crucial in helping communities understand their obligations to veteran populations. Tom Bradley led sessions on addressing veteran homelessness, sharing strategies that had been developed through his own experience and refined through years of working with vulnerable veteran populations. His approach emphasized dignity, choice, and empowerment rather than simply providing temporary shelter. The conference ended with a big moment. 51 countries signed a special paper. This paper promised to help veterans in new ways. The ideas came from what one man and his dog had shown the world. The leader spoke to everyone. He said that one person's brave acts can change the world. The quiet man who once cleaned floors had become famous. He showed that helping others could spread across the globe. The man and his dog went home with letters from veterans everywhere. Their story had touched many hearts. People saw that small acts of kindness could make big changes. 10 years later, the man faced his hardest test. His dog was now 11 years old. The dog was getting sick. His body was tired from years of service. The man knew their time together was ending. The doctors at the hospital watched the dog closely. They gave him the best care possible. The head doctor was kind. She told the man that his dog had earned the right to rest. This was hard for the man to hear. For 10 years, his dog had been everything to him. The dog was his best friend and helper. The thought of losing him was scary. The doctor who had helped them from the start was still there. He was now the head of a big center. He helped make plans for the dog's retirement. They would save his training methods. They would study his genes. They would make books about his work. The doctor explained that the dog's story had helped many others. His work had made service dog training better around the world. Scientists wanted to study his family line. They hoped to find what made him so special. An old woman who had helped them was still working too. She was now 87, but still sharp. She helped plan a special ceremony for the dog. She said this was not an ending, but a new beginning. The ceremony would be at the same place where their story began. The old community center was now a big help center. It served as a model for centers in many states and countries. The man who had organized the first meeting was now a national leader. He made sure veterans from everywhere could come to the ceremony. Hundreds planned to attend. A woman who had become a famous advocate was flying in from another country. She had gone from being a struggling soldier to helping veterans worldwide. The Army captain had made special training for the ceremony. Her work had spread to police and emergency workers in many countries. As the ceremony got closer, the man thought about his journey. It had started with helping a lost dog. He had gone from being invisible to being known around the world. But his greatest success was the bond with his dog. The morning of the ceremony was bright and clear. Veterans and supporters came from across the nation. The crowd included heroes, politicians, and regular people whose lives had been changed. The president came to speak. She talked about what the dog's service meant to the country. She said they were not saying goodbye to a hero, but celebrating a legacy. The dog rested on a special platform. Even though he was tired, he still watched his owner. He was still ready to help if needed. The main doctor gave a report about what they had learned. The dog's service had led to new ways to predict seizures. It had improved how service dogs are trained. It had helped scientists understand the bond between people and animals. The ceremony included talks from veterans who had been helped by programs inspired by the dog's story. One officer had lost his legs but got a new service dog. This dog was trained using methods learned from studying the famous dog. Visitors from other countries shared how they had used these ideas in their own programs. Representatives from 6 countries described how they had helped their own veterans. The dog's story had shown the world that service animals could be true partners. They could understand medical needs with great skill. This had given many veterans back their independence and purpose. The ceremony was not just about one dog. It was about the movement he had started. It was about showing that every veteran deserves support. It was about proving that small acts of kindness can change the world. As the sun set on this special day, everyone knew they had witnessed something important. The dog's legacy would continue. New programs would help veterans for years to come. The quiet man and his faithful dog had shown that heroes come in all forms. Their story reminds us that courage and compassion can cross any border. It shows us that the values of loyalty and service are truly universal. Most importantly, it proves that the most powerful changes often begin with the simplest acts of love. Dr. Yuki Tanaka from the Japanese Self-Defense Force presented research showing how service animal programs based on the bear model had reduced veteran suicide rates by 62% in participating regions. Her work demonstrated that the principles of loyalty, recognition, and community support transcended cultural boundaries. The most emotional moment of the ceremony came when Marcus was presented with Bear's final service record, a document that detailed every medical alert, every life-saving intervention, and every act of loyalty that had defined their partnership. The record showed that Bear had provided 2,847 medical alerts over his career, prevented 127 serious medical emergencies, and had never once failed to respond appropriately to Marcus's needs. As Marcus read the statistics that quantified Bear's devotion, he was overwhelmed by the magnitude of what his companion had given him. "Bear didn't just save my life repeatedly," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "He gave me a reason to live, a purpose to serve, and a connection to a community I had never imagined possible." The ceremony concluded with the unveiling of a bronze statue depicting Marcus and Bear at the moment of their first meeting, when a frightened stray dog had found safety and purpose with a lonely veteran. The statue would serve as a permanent reminder of the transformative power of compassion and the extraordinary potential that existed within ordinary encounters. As the formal proceedings ended, Bear was carefully transported to a specially designed retirement facility on the grounds of the center. The facility had been created specifically for aging service animals, providing them with medical care, comfortable accommodations, and continued interaction with their handlers and the veterans they had served. Marcus would visit Bear daily, maintaining their bond while gradually transitioning to work with a younger service dog who had been trained, using methods developed from studying Bear's exceptional abilities. The transition was difficult emotionally, but Marcus understood that. It honored Bear's legacy by ensuring that his innovations in service animal partnership would continue to benefit other veterans. The months following Bear's retirement saw the establishment of the Bear Institute for Service Animal Excellence, a research and training facility that would study the physiological and psychological factors that made some human-animal partnerships so remarkably effective. The Institute would also develop training programs for service animals and their handlers, ensuring that future partnerships could benefit from the lessons learned during Bear's career. Dr. Stevens led a team of researchers in documenting every aspect of Bear's medical alert protocols, creating detailed training materials that could be used to develop similar capabilities in other service animals. The research revealed that Bear's effectiveness came not just from his natural abilities, but from the extraordinary bond he had developed with Marcus through years of mutual trust and shared experience. Alina Vasquez, despite her advancing age, continued to advocate for the civilian support networks that had been crucial to the movement's success. Her work had demonstrated that veteran support required not just government programs and professional services, but engaged communities willing to recognize and embrace their veteran populations. Tom Bradley had used his platform to establish mentorship programs that paired successful veterans with those still struggling with reintegration challenges. His approach emphasized the power of peer support and the importance of veterans helping other veterans navigate the complex transition from military to civilian life. The global impact of the movement continued to expand, with new programs being established in countries that had previously provided minimal support for their veteran populations. The principles that had emerged from Marcus and Bear's story proved to be universally applicable, transcending cultural, political, and economic differences. As Bear entered his final months, surrounded by the love and respect he had earned through a lifetime of service, his legacy was already being carried forward by hundreds of other service animals trained using his methods and thousands of veterans who had been inspired by his example of unwavering loyalty and dedication. The story that had begun with a simple act of kindness toward a stray dog had grown into a global movement that had transformed how societies understood their obligations to those who had served in military and civilian capacities. Bear's retirement marked not an ending, but a transition to a new phase of impact that would continue to inspire positive change for generations to come. Marcus, though grieving the approaching loss of his closest companion, found comfort in knowing that Bear's influence would continue through the countless lives that had been touched by their partnership and the innovations that their bond had inspired. The quiet dignity with which Bear faced his retirement reflected the same values that had made him such an extraordinary service animal: loyalty, courage, and an unwavering commitment to those who depended on him. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.